we first found fire and we didn't run away from it. You could die from fire, but we built infrastructures and rules and ways we communicate with each other around it so that we can make the most of fire. And I see, hopefully, we do the same thing with AI.
Welcome to the MindTech podcast, where we dive deep into the unsolved problems in mental health with the people building technology to solve them, including founders, investors, and experts in technology for the mind. I'm Manu, your host, and I am excited for you to meet today's guest, Min Lee, the co-founder and CEO of Humin, an app that helps you better understand your mood using data collected from your smartphone and smartwatch. These devices collect a wealth of data about us, and Humin organises all that to give you insight into your mind. Min's journey is nothing short of extraordinary. In her teenage years, she suffered from an eating disorder, which now serves as fuel for her mission to improve mental health with Humin. Let's get into it. Welcome, Min. It's an honour to have you on. How are you doing today?
I'm really good, thank you. And thanks so much for having me on today. Really, such a pleasure to be here.
I'm very excited to dive into all the wonderful work that you do at Humin and the extraordinary journey that's led you here. So um, let's start with why. Why have you dedicated yourself to improving mental health?
It's a great way to start the conversation, and I'm not going to be shy and share why this matters to me. So, I'm originally from South Korea, and I came to the UK when I was 14, I believe, and it was tough. I did not have the same friendship group. I didn't come here with family. So I was sort of coming here on my own. And there were a lot of challenges at that age that I didn't understand how to tackle. And in hindsight, I think that's what led me to developing an eating disorder called bulimia nervosa, which is a type of a quite severe eating disorder that's characterized by binge eating and sort of compensating behavior. And so I spent quite a lot of my childhood in that space, and I found it very sad because it felt very lonely, and it's such a big part of your life where you're so entrapped in your mind and all you can think of is how not good enough you are in your mind. And I just found it so fascinating how a lot of these are impact the way you live. So when I had my eating disorder, it impacted my sleep, how I engaged with other people, how I thought of my own outlook, what I could achieve, but also just how I feel even day to day moving and eating. And so that fundamentally led me to major in mental health. So I studied biomedical science at Imperial, and I decided to choose my major in neuroscience and mental health. And I just started to naturally develop a bit of a desire to help do something in this space. And so that was kind of the start of it. And when I was then sort of studying business, I had a chance to join a company that was bringing psychedelic therapy into the UK to help treat severe depression. And I had such a great time there because that's when I felt like my personal mission was aligned with what the company was doing. And that was a great demonstration for myself to see that actually this is something that I genuinely care about, because the hard work, it feels like there is a purpose for this hard work. People say that, whatever path you choose to be, doesn't matter what profession it is, it's going to be hard. So I may as well choose my hard, the hard that matters to me the most. So that's sort of my story with my mental health. And ever since, it's been sort of an ongoing thing. So I then did a postgrad within sort of mental health space. So I did health technologies, but I specialized all of my research and activities within looking at technologies for mental health. So I'm actually not like a massive tech advocate. Actually, my real focus is in doing what's best for mental health, and my strength happened to be in tech, and so that's sort of where I am at the moment.
Wow, what a transformation, from being dropped in the ocean in the UK, coming from South Korea, and dealing with the stress of that by eating and perhaps not having the education for what the most healthy coping mechanisms would be or the support, and maybe not being, you know, treated very nicely by others, and all of that leading to um, a disorder of the mind, which is so common in the UK. But to hear you go from that into, converting that into a real sense of mission to not just, do what you can at low level, take care of your own mental health, that with friends, but to make a company and to do all your studying and research in that space. That is one of the most, a full circle transformational, um, you know, outcomes that could have possibly happened. And I think credit has to be given to you there of really turning that negative experience, that suffering, into something which is a force for good. And I know you're just at the beginning in terms of the impact that you will have through Humin, but those foundations, they sound incredibly meaningful. So props to you, and props to have the self-awareness as well to understand the nature of your own mind, and the unmet needs that you had, and maybe what you would have liked to
Mm.
um, have had going through that as well. So yeah, extremely insightful overview of your journey and leading you to Humin. What specific problem did you observe that you feel Humin could solve?
That's a great question, sort of going into Humin. So I mentioned a little bit about my eating disorder, and when I recovered from bulimia, clinically speaking, so I'm a big advocate for sort of challenging the status quo around the clinical diagnosis. And I'm sure you have a lot of professional knowledge around this as well. So when I was clinically decided or regarded as recovered, I still really look back and challenge that decision. There was a lot of symptoms boiling under the hood that still was left unaddressed. And that, for me, then manifested into multiple episodes of relapse. And that was really challenging, and I didn't know how to understand it, how to tackle it. And because I was sub threshold, I didn't have anywhere to go. And there wasn't research for sub threshold. A lot of them were for, clinically diagnosed population or healthy population. So in that space, I recognized myself relapsing and started to understand little by little. And I can't emphasize this enough. It was such a long journey, years of just painful experiences to realize that actually there are certain
Mm,
behaviors that I do that signal my likelihood of relapse. And for me, it was surprisingly straightforward. So I'll give you one example. So I kind of relapse, not clinically speaking relapse, but in my own subjective experience, I relapsed. I was not well over COVID. I was doing crazy amounts of exercise, but it was abnormal. I was doing them at home, random bursts of exercise. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't eat. And I, it sounds crazy because I had so many episodes, and I'm usually on top of myself and I'm able to sort of question myself. But all of that went out the window, Manu, because my mind tells me that I'm okay, that I don't need help. And it convinces me towards inaction, that it's okay to keep running away from my fears because it feels comfortable right now. I'm scared of gaining weight. I'm just going to run away from that today and tomorrow and the next day. And when I only get out of that episode after hitting rock bottom, I had the guts to then look at my wearable data after I came out of this relapse episode. And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, my exercise had quadrupled, 4 times
mm,
my baseline. That's a crazy amount of difference. And that made me think, why does it always have to be reactive? Why does mental health always have to be, you have to hit rock bottom and then you'll do something about
Mm.
it, hopefully. But then the next time you have a challenge, you again will have to wait until you hit rock bottom, enough so that you're going to challenge the stigma, ask for help. You're going to go out of your way to do things. I want to change that. What if we can nudge people at the right time? What if we know the signature before relapse? What if we can tell what good looks like in each individual with how we behave as human beings? Because behavior and the mind is so closely tied together. And there are challenges to making that more accurate and valid. However, that's the vision that I see for Humin. So that's what I want to do in this space, making health more preventative, more precise, and more personalized, so that it's no longer about go for a walk. Because for some people, that might not always be a good intervention. But then what is a good intervention? How do we measure that? And what I'm saying is there are a lot of data that we collect already from our own phones, our wearables, our laptops. And these are, in my personal opinion, often fed to benefit companies and sort of advertising market, etc., etc. My vision is to get a sense of people owning that data and to be able to use that for their own mental health, to find their own signature around mental health patterns, to understand what their mental health patterns are, to get a sense of empowerment, and also move towards that space of, can I do something if it doesn't look right, if it starts to, okay, I might be on a bit of a downward spiral, that's okay. I know these interventions have worked previously based on my own data, so I might give that a go and change the course of that.
Mm. So it's the lack of reliable, continuous information that, you know, could be presented to people in a way that empowers them to gain insight into their mind and then take action on that. So, is what you're saying, um, does that just help the person become more aware of themselves, or is this something that has a place in clinical practice as well?
I absolutely see a vision in clinical practice. So I think there is a roadmap to be had. Anyone who's doing a startup, you do need to understand your weaknesses. And our weakness is that we might not necessarily be wanting to go for like a medical device straight away, because we want to generate a more inclusive AI model. And there are certain barriers to getting to clinical tool development. However, I think there is a huge potential for clinical impact. For example, I see a couple of things. So I'd say mainly three things. First of all is diagnosis support. So capturing the diagnosis early is so key in having a hope to change that patient's perspective of the disease severity. So for example, there is a 8-year on average delay for bipolar disorder, because often the first symptom that gets presented looks like unipolar depression. And unless the patient themselves are aware of what symptoms might have been hypomania, so quite subtle manic symptoms, it could be as simple as, I was able to work 5 days, super late nights, and I didn't feel quite tired. Great. Nothing wrong with that. There's no need to complain about that. So we're missing signs earlier on, and we then are treating patients as if they were unipolar depression, which has a lot of clinical consequences. So that is a specific example where I see a big potential to be able to see the behavioral, as you say, as you perfectly put, objective longitudinal behavioral data to say, actually, we see a really interesting dip here in your sleep and your energy levels were still really high. What's going on? Could this be bipolar disorder type 2? So first space is
Mm.
diagnostics, but also relapse prevention is something that I just talked about. Clinicians often say that what's fascinating about mental health is, if you have a condition, it depends, of course, what you have, but specifically for bipolar disorder, for example, the relapse behaviors differ between every individual, which makes consultation incredibly challenging because everybody is different. However, if you look at the course of one individual, surprisingly, the signatures of behaviors before relapse is quite coherent. They're the same behaviors that
Mm-hmm.
happen before an episode of relapse. So we see an opportunity there around what is the clinical sort of baseline behavior that we see in this individual that correlate to, an okay severity, but then can we make predictions as to, okay, based on this behavioral change, we think this person might be going towards a relapse and there is this percent chance of risk of relapse. Then ultimately, what do you do with that? It's about earlier intervention. Can we predict that risk of relapse and go, there is quite a high risk of relapse, we should signpost this person for self-referral for talking therapy so that we can intervene early and we can get this person cared for before it gets to higher severity. So that's number two. And finally is more around long-term management and empowerment in clinical settings. A lot of the time, clinical consultations are controlled, not controlled, but a lot of the weight is still in the clinician's hands. And I think there is a movement within mental health, at least in the UK, to shift some of that empowerment to the patient as well, so that they know what's going on exactly behind decision making, communicate what symptoms they've experienced, and understand how the intervention might be working for them with a bit more data, because we forget that these require a lot of verbal skills, lot of uh, willingness to write symptoms down manually day to day. Not all patients are able to do this. So the third opportunity in the clinical space is to do with really empowering the patient with the information so that they feel heard, they feel like they understand what's going on, they see the impact, they can adhere, they can feel encouraged. So these are the three things I would say that I see in terms of opportunity in the clinical space.
Hmm. So it's capturing and organizing information from smartphone and wearable data about patients' mental state and not claiming to be able to intervene, but being able to connect people with interventions and shine a light on their need for interventions. So, do you will Humin be able to give any uh, interventions or help people improve their mood, or is it more about um, holding a mirror up and giving that self awareness?
Yeah, I'll be honest and say that intervention is a very hard space where we have to have the right expertise and testing to be able to do this. And the analytics for personal pattern detection is so complex, and we feel as though it's so important to do it well. It will probably take up all of our attention for the foreseeable future. So we mostly see the intervention as being signposting. However, there are different levels of intervention as well. So there is, top class where you say, we can diagnose you and these are the treatment that we know you can get, and you don't necessarily need to see a clinician because we can replace them. And I think on the lower scale of that is, we're not saying this will treat you, but based on your previous data that we saw, hey, these some of these behaviors increased your mood by this percent. And given
Mm,
that your mood is heading down, how about some of these interventions that you did specifically in this time last year? So delivering behavioral change that is derived from your own data based on our user research, people have said that
yeah.
it hits differently because it's not about a
Mm,
generic advice. It's derived from their data. It's yours. And so people feel warmer to doing that
mm,
and changing their behaviors that way. So that level of intervention, we are certainly already experimenting and doing it with our user group. And ultimately, our goal is to be able to go to that clinical space. But there is a lot of work to do in between.
mm. Yeah. Well, I think there is a hugely unmet need in giving people that insight and that awareness, and it may be that that's the gap that you're filling first, right? Just getting people in the know about data that is theirs. And for whoever's listening, if you haven't figured it out already, of course, Humin is an app that helps you discover your mood patterns using smartphone and wearable data, all anonymously recorded, of course. And to do this, Min and her team, they take data and they track it passively. So, um, can you speak a little about the value of objective measures rather than subjective measures, and how that is a real uh, game changer in mental health?
Absolutely. And for some of the listeners, you know, you may have tried journaling before, you may have tried mood tracking or symptom tracking, habit tracking, all of these things. We call them subjective data. So a lot of the time you rank yourself. How did you think you slept? How do you think you are right now? How do you think your social activity levels are right now? So these, you perceive them for yourself. And that has a very tricky space with a bias. Humans are hugely biased by our emotional state at the time of response. So, depending on what frame of mind I am, for example, I might really pessimistically score my sleep, whereas actually objectively I slept all right. So, it's a really fascinating space. And the power of objective data is it provides you with that validity that subjective data cannot fill. And I'll come on to this in a little bit later about like combining objective and subjective data together, because that is what I see as ideal. But subjective data is also burdensome. I don't know about you guys, but I failed journaling a couple of times, never mind. And I tried habit trackers before as well, and it wears off me. It is quite hard to maintain, and I feel like it's homework. So this idea of manual input that leads to subjective data, or is manual input is essential for subjective data, is in mental health ultimately a barrier. And let's just think out of our own minds, but for other people, right? Think about someone who is in a really, really severe depressive episode. How is that person going to pick up a pen, pick up a piece of paper, and write down how crap they feel? Do we think even that's ethical? Seriously. And how that leads to what I'm about to explain is often in mental health, the more severe the conditions, the more severely the people are impacted in their ability to give valid information and assessment of their own symptoms. So that's the power and the value of objective data. And it's unfortunately not largely incorporated in clinical practice yet. And the power of using the passive data is linked to the idea of reducing the burden that you have to give, because there are lots of mental health conditions that are long term. And is it really ethical for us to put all of that burden on the patient and say, we need you to fill out this information because we want to help you? And that's great. But from the patient's perspective, every single patient pretty much that I've spoken to, which is a lot, have said, I don't feel great when doctors do that to me. I get that they're trying to help me, but I just look at the paper, I just look at these apps and say, there's something I have to do. There's something wrong with me. They don't feel empowered. So the idea of passive objective data is to support people when they aren't able to put in the manual effort every single day. So that I like this phrase within our team that one of our designers came up with, which is, we have their back. We have your back. If you can't log with the passive data and analytics, we can fill that in for you. We'll do it for you. And it's yours. It's all anonymized. We're not going to be, using the data to sell the data. Our interest is in the AI modeling and predictive analytics. So people can enjoy having their data bank and the knowledge and the wealth of this objective passive information that they can sustain over time without the same amount of burden on themselves.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it makes sense that the objective data is something that will be collected passively, and the subjective data on top is kind of a bonus that can enhance when it is valid. But obviously, when patients are too unwell, it can actually skew the results a little bit and the insight into their condition, because the their view of what they're going through may not be the most accurate. So the objective way of doing it is really helpful, especially in something as abstract as the mind.
And I just want to really advocate for this, and what you just mentioned around combining objective and subjective. I by no means want to say that subjective data is not useful. It's so important. It matters how we think we feel. It's so important. That is the mind. That's our experience. However, for that to solely dictate or influence the big decisions that could be made in
Mm,
clinical practice, you might be prescribed antipsychotics, you might be prescribed the wrong drug, you might end up thinking differently about yourself as a result of these things, and your outlook might change, how other people look at you. There's so many influencing factors. So just to re-advocate for this combination, we want to supercharge the way we do mental health with more confidence.
mm. Yeah, no, that's definitely something missing right now. So very excited to hear more about the kind of things that you track. And I know you've mentioned already sleep, activity, app usage, all of those kind of things. But specifically, I wonder, particularly because of your background and your experiences with disorders of eating, do you put the person's behavioral data in the context of a particular mental condition that they have and that they may disclose, or do you sort of just treat everyone the same, if you know what I mean? Because, for example, if you knew that they did have an eating disorder, then you could pay special attention to their activity levels, that kind of thing, to be particularly sensitive for overly exercising, right? So I wonder if you've thought about how you may tailor the algorithms according to the conditions that people may disclose about themselves.
Again, such a great question, Manu. I would say that at this stage, we will steer away from sort of having a clinical um, underlying input. However, we do encourage our users to share that if they would like to, so they can go into their profile and put in a condition that they have. And what this will help us do in the future is potentially be able to invite certain people for R&D in the right arm, so that we're doing in a controlled setting. So we need to do this in a safe way as much as possible. And I'd say at this stage, we're only focusing on mood, which could span multiple mental health conditions like depression, bipolar disorder. It could be borderline personality disorder. It could be anxiety. It could be eating disorders. And so we are starting with, let's not worry too much about the underlying clinical conditions and work on individual pattern detection first. And with that, let's fish out different arms. For example, I'm very interested in inviting people who are saying that they have depression, and people who are saying they have bipolar disorder, and people who are saying that they don't have anything, and comparing those behavioral patterns and seeing if there is a
Mm,
statistical difference between those patterns. So that's my approach, the roadmap towards being able to do that. But at this stage, when we're not doing that yet.
mm. It's brilliant to hear of your plans to include people with lived experience in the development of the product. Of course, it's crucial to ensuring the products meet the needs of the people it's being built for. And as a founder who has lived experience herself, it's no surprise that it's something that you value. Um, Even now, today, how are you making this a priority at Human, including people with lived experience?
That's a great question, and especially if some of the listeners are either interested in taking part in something like that, or you're a founder who wonders, how do I actually do this when I'm starting my startup? So the first thing that you can do quite easily is to simply go out and do a survey. It's probably the lowest barrier intervention you can do, because you're asking for an opinion based on quite a mass population. So we did this to start with at Humin. And then we invited people to do one-to-one interviews. And for those who are founders, I cannot emphasize the importance of speaking to people. And there is a big trap for founders where you don't have enough time. You're so busy. You need to find out the business model. You need to find the best partners. You need to find the tech stack. I get that. But ultimately, who are you helping? Who are you solving the problem for? Do you understand what they're going through? Because seeing these individuals who are impacted by bipolar disorder, the relapse, the mood disorder, the impact on their lives, and their frustration with the experience will, I believe, make you a better founder ultimately. So we did one-to-one interviews. I believe we did over 20 so far. So 20 hours of speaking to people, and we do this on a regular basis. So we have an influx of people who come in, sign up to be our sort of user support group members, and we invite them to all of our testing and design experiments and interviews. And the first thing that I recommend people to do is book in a time with me to just speak about what has brought them here, what their experience has been with mental health. So I can't emphasize that enough. And I'm not going to go too much into sort of agile practice, because I'm sure a lot of the professionals who are listening to this will be very skilled at that. And having agile practice is important. And I would just advocate and challenge you guys to think about how stagnant are your user pool, because it's something that I'm trying to solve for Humin right now. When you have a user support group who are already advocating for you, it's so tempting to just sit in that cozy space. It's safe. Everyone likes you. Everyone loves your product. I know, but it could be a big trap. So you need to go out of your way. So we're working with Sheffield Flourish Charity at the moment to find real community people who do not care about us and go, hey, can you try this MVP, and do you mind if we watch what you do and look at what mistakes they're making? These are real user engagements where you're not looking for an answer already. You're not looking for them to love your product. You're genuinely curious about, will this help people who are not digitally skilled? Will this be usable for those who don't care about us? And I'd say that's such an important thing to think about. And one thing that we did do also is we've embedded a user advocate within the core team. So we have Jo, who has been an incredible asset to us. She has a really important role in advocating for the end user voice. So when it comes to a discussion, what often happens, we'll go into like a really nitty gritty detail and debate, and we'll often be pulled out of that thinking, have you spoken to our user group? Have you thought about this? Have you thought what this might feel for the end users? Because I feel that's slightly concerning. So making sure that we don't forget that by embedding somebody within the team who advocate for end users has been so helpful for us. And I've already touched upon this, but do partnerships with people in the community who are wanting people to engage with the community, because people are more than happy to help you. It's just that we don't ask because it's scary, and I'm certainly scared. So those couple of things that we're doing right now at Humin to involve the community.
Yeah. Wow. So people with lived experience aren't just involved in giving feedback on the product, but also other people behind making the product, and that's a very unique edge, I'd say. It's fascinating to hear you speak so passionately about user experience research, as I see that it's one of your current roles in the NHS in user research. So I wonder how this helps feed into your work with Humin, and what are some of the most insightful skills and ways of approaching building a product that you've learned from your time in user research in the NHS, and how that may be useful for Humin?
Actually, it's a great question. I might be really frank and honest and say there's really not much overlap. So unfortunately,
Okay.
with the user research itself, because the work that I do for NHS app and website is so big in scale. We often look at nationally representative research that's not quite agile, because these processes take a long time to get the right approvals for, to make sure we have the right resources. So we have projects in the pipeline to support the NHS, and these projects are ran completely differently. They're often sort of waterfalls, so really staged, target sample. We're sort of going out with one set of questions and one set of like hypotheses in mind, rather than figuring out as we go and iterating, etc. Although that's what the NHS app product teams do for their features, I sit more in the strategic team to say, look, this is the public direction for the NHS app and website. And so the overlap is limited. However, being a part of the NHS has helped me certainly see some of the challenges around doing an innovation in this space. So I have a lot of experience in procurement personally within national scale projects. So I've rolled out a software in secondary care in 17 hospitals, and that was hugely challenging. And this was already an established software, and the challenges around integration, getting clinical time buy-in, because nobody has time, the risk appetite to do this, making sure you have evidence. It's a chicken and egg situation, and in a lot of these problems, where the money is going to come from, the sustainability of that source of funding in the NHS is so volatile. So I've learned a lot of things that could be challenging for Humin to be integrated in the NHS as we move forward. So I would probably answer in a slightly different space. It's been helpful, but the research, it was quite different.
I guess you're seeing it from both ends of the spectrum then, from building from the ground up with Humin, and then from your work with the NHS, the biggest organization in the UK, and doing on such a large scale. And I'm sure Humin every day nudges one step closer to that larger scale operation. So I'm sure your experience will increasingly become useful for you. I just want to talk though a little bit about your business model. I hear you speak about the NHS and procurement, and how that may have given you an idea of how Humin may be integrated into these kind of healthcare systems. And what I want to focus on in the business model here is your approach to data. So I understand that you take an edge computing approach to keep the user's data with them on their phone, rather than moving their data around and making it vulnerable to breaches of privacy. And I just wondered what your thoughts are on how that, of course, prioritizes the security and the patient empowerment with the data, but it may close the door on possible streams of revenue from what you could have done with that data. And just wanted to hear your thoughts really on how you've made that decision based on the values of Humin, and how you intend on um, generating revenue whilst keeping your product so secure and accessible to those who need it most.
Absolutely. What a brilliant question. So the reason why we said no to doing something about the data, I'd say there is one exception, which is a collaboration with a large scale research that we believe is for public good. So, for example, if there's a landmark study that we are collaborating with other big organizations, then we would potentially surface that and invite people to sign up through that way and volunteer to get their data shared. But in the general sense, the reason why we came to this decision is, I have to be frank about this. And I said this in one of our pitch talks, is, in my opinion, business is not generating a startup that can truly impact people in the way that I wanted to. We can't make decisions just solely based on revenue and what looks good on paper. And I'm going to say the reason why we said no is because it felt wrong. There is no other way for me to logically give you an explanation.
Mm,
I don't think I can stand tall. I think my mum would be ashamed of me. This is a type of mom test that I do. Would my mum and my gran be proud of me? And I thought, I don't think they would be. Why is that? Because it fundamentally
mm,
touches some of your ethical questions, like, is that right? Do people really know what you're doing with that
mm,
data? Because if they do, fine, but how are you going to communicate that to them? Do they really understand? Where is the ethical line? So it's just, I just want that to be people's own thing. And
Mm.
I'm hoping that people would appreciate that more and more going forward, and that it's not easy to sort of give up on some of these decisions. However, that just is right for us, and we had no challenge from any of the team. Everyone was just all agreed that this is just the right thing,
Mm.
and we want to feel in a certain way when we work in this team. So that's what the decision, where the decision came from. And I forgot the second question now.
Well, let me lead back into it. I mean, just to echo your point, that it is a question of ethics, and it's great to hear how you stand so tall on your ethical principles, because I'm sure, when you pitch to investors, they may want to nudge you in the direction of, oh, but there's so many valuable things you could do with all that sensitive data, and you have to be firm. But they must then ask you, okay, so how do you intend on kind of making money from this if it's not by um, using that data, which
Of
which
course.
is leading to that second question of what your business model is.
Brilliant. Yeah. So uh, I I don't see sort of not selling data as a problem at all. Actually, I think it's a great opportunity to really focus on the performance of the algorithm. So a couple of things. I think to start with, we are planning to generate revenue through the product and the platforms itself. So we have an app at the moment, but we are planning to engage with organizations who would be interested in supporting individual mental health and being able to sort of quantify their organizational mental health without being able to trace it to individual level. So making mental health quantifiable for organizations and real time. So these are products and platforms that people can have access to without sort of selling the data. And in the long term, as we develop multiple algorithms, my vision is to have a bit of a pipeline. If you look at pharmaceutical companies, not that we'll be a pharmaceutical company, you have pipelines for each sort of condition, and you have different drugs at different stages. In a similar way, you can have different algorithms for different conditions where you kind of take validation of these algorithms through each of the stage of clinical impact. So having algorithms that can be embedded in clinical practice in their clinical systems so that the analytics run, but the data is still within the patient. However, you're getting the output thanks to the algorithm. So monetizing the actual algorithm and implementation itself is something that I see a huge potential in. And of course, you can then put a shell on those algorithms and diversify your portfolio as a product. So something that I'm really passionate about for us and our growth is modularized analytics. So we don't just sort of merge all the data in one go and ask you train algorithms to predict the outcome, but we modularize them by symptom groups. So sleep, physical activity, and in the future, social activity. And we're even very interested in sort of vocal biomarkers and the way that you engage with the tool itself. And for each of these symptom groups, they can be trained in slightly different ways for different conditions. So, for example, later we might say that these patterns are really prominent in bipolar disorder for these modules. These symptoms are really prominent for OCD for these modules. So, we can diversify. My prediction is relatively easily by doing that so that we can scale across different conditions, and the data that we have sort of got from people to train the models will be so invaluable. Yeah, that's our plan.
Hmm. Yeah, I think if you were to sell the data to others like advertisers, then the advertising companies become your customer, and the users with the mental health uh, issues become the product, which is of course the social dilemma. And it's great to hear that a mental health technology company like Humin is on the right side of that, and it's it also means that the customer base can be even more loyal because they respect how you're doing things the right way rather than the easy or the profitable way. Um, in terms of other ways of generating revenue, I think I echo your approach there. Where it just makes it more of an interesting problem to solve rather than um, a problem in itself that is a huge obstacle. So if you are able to get those modular profiles of each person in their sleep and in all these other ways, there may be scope to matchmake with specific interventions later down the line, perhaps for things like sleep, and you can measure how effective those interventions have been to your whole cohort. So I think, yeah, with the good, reliable data and a loyal customer base, these opportunities for generating revenue by matchmaking with interventions is definitely on the table. Um, I think as well in research, as you mentioned, that's one of your collaborations. It's also a good revenue stream because people often people are quite happy to contribute to research because they know that they're here to get help, and if just by sharing their data, it will lead to helping other people. It just makes things a little less dog eat dog and a little more everyone helping each other. So I like the culture that you are instilling not only within your company but within the customer base as well.
It's great to hear,
But
sort of hear you, sorry, to
be,
talk about the data side of things. Just one thing I want to advocate for is a lot of the health
sure.
data don't necessarily speak to each other. So there is a huge issue in the field that we're operating in within digital phenotyping, where the way that we compute these behavioral modules is not standardized across any organizations or product. So there are huge influencing organizations who are trying to make this movement towards standardization, and we've certainly been involved with a couple of them ourselves, and we're really passionate about sort of getting in that movement to say we'll go out of our way to work with these people to sort of do our analytics in the way that could be upcycled in the future, so that when people say, do you know what, we want to contribute to this research and help us understand these illnesses a bit more detail or compared to healthy, etc., we're able to do that without having to worry about none of these data pooling together to create the systematic evidence overall. So that's something I'm also very passionate about.
Hmm. Yeah, it's that does seem like that the fragmentation of data there, and trying to overcome that does sound like an interesting obstacle. Have you faced any other significant obstacles in your journey here with Human, and any in particular that come to mind that have been quite tough obstacles, and how you've had to try and solve them?
It's been so many challenges. Validity of the analytics is something that is still a big challenge for us. And it's so fundamental to the technology. So it's a big risk that we are keeping an eye on and trying to mitigate. So we need more people to help us train the models. We need more capacity for scientific testing. We are launching a study with Young People's Mental Health charity. We're discussing how we want to do the study design at this stage for 2024. So that's how we are tackling it. But it's certainly a huge, huge challenge. And do you know what? What kind of blows my mind is the gold standard way of capturing mental health is subjective questionnaires, right? So hear me out.
Hmm.
I sometimes get a bit of a mind wave of about, hey, wait, hang on a second. Like, is that really the truth? What is the truth? We're training data on subjective data, which
Hmm.
might be wrong. So, how are we going to tackle this problem of assessing accuracy and validity in mental health? And what is the leeway of acceptability within, for example, in future clinical practice, that this would be acceptable? Such a fascinating question. And I never come up with an answer, but it's something I think everyone could probably take away and think about. And another important challenge is regulation. I'm
Yeah,
sure
I
every
just
single, yeah, sorry, Manu.
yeah, I was just going to say on that first one before we get into the regulations. You mentioned it earlier, Min, about outcomes, and of course the assessments are subjective, and one way around that is the objective measurements that you do. But really being clear on what are the outcomes that we're aiming for here, and how they may be very different for each person, and optimizing for those, being very outcome based and measurement based towards those outcomes, that may be the best way of really analyzing the efficacy of these things. And I think the point you're making there is we have a whole lot of work to do in improving our understanding of those outcomes before we can even try and measure up um, the efficacy of interventions that are trying to achieve those outcomes, right?
Absolutely.
So it's again another chicken and egg problem, but just being aware of it does help get your head around it a little bit. But go on, you were going to say something about the regulations.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure this is something that everyone who is in the AI analytics space or product will say, but it is hard to predict where this will go and how, for example, the UK regulations will differ from EU and the US. I tend to try and keep an eye out on the US movement. I see them as uh, usually the pioneer for a lot of these regulations, but it is quite a big risk depending on how the regulations evolve. A lot of the analytics or the way the product's organized can change, which might have an influence on the performance of the models as well. And even it could impact you in a way that maybe you can't market the product anymore with the degree of the model that you have. Maybe so it can stagger the product development process potentially as well. I'm not saying that's a problem because I think it's positive. There needs to be, I always like say, AI, people are scared about it sometimes, and I would actually put myself in that bracket. But we need to be brave, and we first found fire and we didn't run away from it. You could die from fire, but we built infrastructures
Mm,
and rules and ways we communicate with each other around it so that we can make the most of fire. And I see, hopefully, we do the same thing with AI. And one thing that's really important is more sources like this podcast and sources to educate people on what you need to watch out for when it comes to data sharing and what implications that might have, because it really is, knowledge is power, and everyone can read up and be aware of privacy and data and really start to advocate for that movement so that everyone has equal shares of control rather than sort of giving the power to organizations and just hoping that they would do the right thing, which can be a dodgy territory. But yeah, sorry, drifting away a little bit, but regulations is a huge challenge. And yeah, I'm sure a lot of the
mm,
startups have this challenge, but resource is always a constraint. We have tight resources, and trying to prioritize opportunities is incredibly difficult. So we try to come up with a framework with sizing the different opportunities that Humin has in working with certain organizations and what it means to us and what the potential reward could be, whether that's feasible. But that's always a challenge, and quite big ones, because ultimately people are what makes a team, a company, a product. And there is only so much these people can deliver, and we need to be mindful where we spend our energy.
mm. Absolutely. I love where that went, especially with the fire analogy. I think it gives everyone the sense that we have come across an absolutely otherworldly kind of technology, but it's up to us to contain it and package it up in ways that it's not so harmful. So that was wonderful, and it's great to hear how that is at the forefront of your mind when building such a powerful technology. So just a last couple of questions then, while while we're in the middle of this interesting conversation. Um, what are you working on right now that is exciting you the most?
That's a great question. So I'm really
Mm,
excited about community engagement. I know we talked about this earlier, but we have a partnership coming up with Sheffield Flourish Charity, and we would I'm
mhm,
just so excited of the idea of going there, seeing people in person, and doing this activity together to get input and co-create. And I think it's something that I'll never push back. into sort of the lower priority zones. We're also in conversations with, as I said, young people's mental health to deliver a piece of a study in 2024, which I'm very excited about, because it will show to everybody that we are really striving to invest towards evidence. Like, none of these studies are really easy to do at the stage that a startup is in. However, it's important, and we want to build trust. We want to show people that we care about the performance and how the product works. And it's proof, it's living proof that you're engaging with the community, because that also involves people who are participating. So I'm really excited about that. And finally is partnerships with other organizations like ICBs, private clinics, employers, potentially universities as well, who are really driven to take care of their own people and who are driven to actually understand what's going on. That's something that excites me the most. So working together with other people who care in 2024, really looking forward to it.
Wonderful, and that is a fantastic thought to close the year on, setting yourself up nicely for the next year. It's wonderful how each of those um, elements that excite you are all surrounding collecting evidence-based data for Humin and making sure that it's valid, making sure that it's useful, making sure that it's needed and wanted. And as you said, it's not something that a lot of other startups have to deal with outside of the healthcare space, and it's quite resource intensive. So brilliant to hear that you have those partnerships in place. And for anyone listening, um, as Min mentioned earlier, I think there is an opportunity to, via the website, get involved and be involved in some of the testing, especially if you do have lived experience. So Min, just one last question then before we bring this to a close, and it's a little more of a personal one, but it's one that I think is important for a leader like yourself. What do you do to take care of your own mental health?
Oh, I love this question. It's my favorite one. I would have said to love myself unconditionally, but I find that really hard. I think I accept myself for who I am, and I think last year Min was, this is the Min that who has to be, you know, a founder should be like this, and to be a high performing individual you have to be like this. It just isn't true, and I was burning out from that image
Mm,
of myself and that ego, and trying to chase that dream like every day. It's like, no, I'm a human being. I'm tired. I need I need something to nourish me, and that's okay. Like, I'm not a superhuman. That's completely fine. But somehow I thought I had to be better. I had to be outstandingly different to anything else. And that's great because it probably makes you ambitious, but like, at the end of the day, we're just all human being that needs taking care of. We need to see our shadows and be like, actually, this is also me. Yeah, I don't love it, but it's okay. It's me. And accepting
mm,
that had huge impact on how I work. I don't deprioritize the things that I need for myself. I don't grind myself into work anymore. We coexist. I do it because I want to. I do it because I choose to, and it makes me happy. And I think we just need to remember that it's all a choice and we're not going to be here forever. So you may as well, do something that matters to you, but do it in the way that makes you happy. And if some people come to you and say, you're not working, these typical hours that I would expect from founder, oh, come on. That says a lot about that individual, right? So don't lose that faith and
mm,
protect you, because ultimately that's going to impact your team. It's going to impact people around you. It's going to impact you. It's going to impact your decision making. It's going to impact the product, how people experience the product. So we have to um, accept ourselves and what we need.
mm. Wow, a little less self-judgment and a little more self-compassion. I love it.
It's
And
hard, but
hopefully
it
it's
has to be
something
done.
that, mm, yeah, no, it's definitely an ideal that we can all strive to, and we may never be perfect at, but just being conscious of our need for it and moving the needle just that much. it makes a massive difference. And it's brilliant to hear how that is the mindset of someone leading the development of mental health technology, and I'm sure that will manifest itself in the product. So um, wonderful stuff, Min. It has been a pleasure to discuss your journey and the exciting work that you and your team are doing at Humin to help people better understand what is going on in their minds using their smartphone and wearable data. So, just one last time, Min, for everyone listening, how can people support and get involved with Humin?
As you said, Manu, please have a look at our website. It's www.humin.uk, so humin.uk. You can sign up to be a part of our user support group. It's an amazing group. And I'd also love to hear from other people who are listening who are interested in having a chat about mental health or potential partnerships in the future. I'd love to hear from you. So drop me an email. I'll give you the email address in the show notes.
Hmm. Also, I would really recommend checking out Humin's podcast, in which Min shares her experience with bulimia, giving an insight into how it started, how it progressed, and how she recovered. It's a great example of how sharing lived experience of mental illness can make people feel more comfortable with accessing help themselves. And it's a very open, honest thing for someone in such a position, to open up about. So um, definitely worth checking that out as well. But other than that, Min, it's been an honor, and I'm sure we'll
Been an honor for me.
hopefully get a chance to meet up. And yeah, thank you very much. Looking forward to potentially the next one.
Thank you so much, Manu, for your time, and well done and congratulations on this podcast. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this insightful discussion. If you did, the best way for you to support the MindTech podcast is by sharing this episode with someone, subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing your thoughts in a comment. If you're interested in learning a little more about your mind and how you can get the most from your most powerful resource, you can check out The Mind Explored, an email newsletter I send each week with an insight into your mind and a tool to improve it. You can access all the articles and subscribe at www.mindtechpodcast.com. Thank you for your interest in the mind and how technology can meet its needs. Until next time, goodbye.